We are now live.
We're live. Awesome.
We are now.
Nice to see you again, Lloyd, although we have been sat in a lobby together for the last 5 minutes. How are you doing, brother?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm really good. Thanks, Reuben. Thanks for joining me. For those watching this live and those watching when we post it on YouTube, which will be early next week, and for those listening in the future, this is Source Presents. It's a series that I set up about 18 months ago, and the idea is that we wanted to interview people in our network who are in the tech SaaS space. Predominantly, if you look back at the episodes we've done so far, most likely they'll be in the go-to-market function in some way, shape, or form. We've interviewed everybody from an SDR to a CRO. We've also interviewed some COOs. I've actually not had any founders on yet, so maybe that's the next thing that I need to do. But today, the person that I have is somebody that we were just talking about this. It's taken about a year of me asking Reuben to come on because there are certain people, certain candidates that you work with who are truly memorable for various reasons. And Reuben, for me, falls into that category. So, Reuben, thanks for joining. We're going to spend about half an hour talking about your background and the journey that you've gone through, because I think that, as we talked a bit about this transition from how do you get into sales, then how do you make that transition from being in a non-tech, non-SaaS B2B sales role, and it's difficult to make that transition. And you've made it, other people who've made it. So I want you to hopefully share as much insight and knowledge as you can about that journey and the surprises along the way. So maybe to begin with, you'd like to give just a bit of background and a bit of an overview on you and how you come to be where you are now.
Yeah, nice. I hope those memorable reasons are positive, by the way, because I can be a bit Marmite at
I knew you were
times.
going to say that. I knew you were going to say that. I'll come
That
on to a
means I'm
couple of those as we
predictable.
go.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so who's Reuben? That's me, obviously. I'm from the northwest of England. I've been in sales across 4 different industries over, wow, a decade now. I currently am a strategic account executive with an MLOps platform provider called High. Without boring or exciting everyone to sleep on who High are, in short, it helps the organizations that produce AI products do it faster, cheaper, better. So that's me. Great to be here, and I'm glad we could finally get this in the diary, Lloyd. It is entirely my fault that it's taken a year, and I do apologize.
You are without doubt one of the busiest and most all in. I think that's a fair. It's a fair description. It's certainly the way I view it. Character in the way that you approach your career, and certainly so far, I'm taken back to when we first spoke, which was when you were looking to make the move on from a business called Raconteur, and I remember you. One of the things that sticks in my mind, you asked what makes you memorable, is that you told me this story where you used to each year be set a target, and then you used to negotiate on that target and say, that's good, but if I could get to there, what would that be worth? Is
Yeah,
that right?
it's very well remembered. Yeah, so my target would be raised every year.
Yep.
So obviously, I'd be like, I'm setting my own bar, someone's raising it. And I figured out it was futile to put top-down pressure on that target, and it probably didn't suit the needs of the business. So I used to essentially gamble on the upside. But that's exactly what I did. Yeah, it's good memory.
But those kind of things stand out because I don't speak to a lot of people who have, I think, two things actually. I don't speak to a lot of people who do that. And maybe I don't speak to a lot of people who are given the opportunity to do that.
Yes, I think one thing that I've learned over my career is patience. I'm still an impatient person, but I think you can work at a business and then it becomes very easy to spot problems or things that you don't like.
Yeah.
But then if you go to another business, you realize actually I'm not the only person in the world, and some of the problems that you see in business A might be worth in business B. I think one of the reasons why I was in a position to do that at that particular company was because of how long I've been there and the numbers, etc. I won't be doing that at my current company for a while, that's for sure.
No, I get that. I definitely get that. And I think I'll come on to talking about Raconteur because I think they're a really interesting and quite unique business for different reasons. If we just start just to give a bit of context at the beginning. So you graduated, really good academic background, and then decided to start a career in B2B sales. Why?
Yeah, good question. Honestly,
Yeah.
I didn't know at the time. In retrospect, I know now, but I'm from single parent background, and I never had someone in my life that was coaching me on this is how you plan the next 5, 10, 20 years of your life. So I picked an economics degree because pretty interesting to me, opens a lot of doors, but I didn't actually know what was going to be next. Then around the time I was applying for the banks, investment banking, which is what everyone wanted to do, I think if I remember correctly, it was the announcement that there's going to be a Brexit referendum, or maybe the referendum result. Blew those opportunities up. So then I put myself into interview processes, and it turns out I love sales. I love B2B sales. I'd like to give myself some credit as if there was some kind of grand plan, but there was no grand plan.
I think there really is. I actually find it quite scary when I interview candidates who are straight out of university and have got such clarity of thought around what they want to do. It's often influenced, I think, by the people around them. If you've had a parent who's been a successful software sales leader, that's naturally going to have a strong influence. You're going to have a unique and inside track into it. But there are people that I meet who don't have that and still have this absolute clarity and determination to be, that's what I want to do. And I do find it scary, because I definitely didn't have it. You, at the time, so you went into kind of media publishing sales. At that point, were you aware of, did you know much about the different avenues that you could take? Or was it just like, I'm going to be a salesperson, I'm going to sell something?
No, and actually more extreme than that, right? So I went into media sales and I loved it. I immediately loved it. It transpired that I had quite frankly, an unhealthy work ethic that I didn't know existed. I like to chase. I like dealing with customers and potential customers a lot. But as years went on and I felt I've stopped learning, I started to almost create new things to invent problems for me to solve. I actually didn't realize that you could transition. And a shout out to yourself and Sourced. You were one of the first people I spoke to for advice on, can I transition to a new sector? So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
It does. It definitely does. And so then, just plotting that forward, you then went and spent 5 years at Raconteur, which, as I mentioned, from a recruiter's perspective, a long time ago, I used to do some recruitment for Raconteur. But post that, and when I started to just move into just purely SaaS tech, startup, scale-up world, which has been the last 5-6 years, I've just seen Raconteur as being such a, to be honest, a happy hunting grounds to find really to find high caliber individuals who have thrived in a fairly high performance environment. I think there's a cohort of people over the years who I look at that they've left, and people who you've introduced me to, and almost all of them have gone on to do great things. Which is interesting when you break down the fundamentals of what they actually do as a business.
So dead right, happy hunting ground. And sorry, Will, my former boss at Raconteur, but he knew it becomes self-perpetuating, right? Because you speak to one good person and then people cotton on, or they came from here. And then other recruiters will spot, okay, so this person's at Zscaler. Where were they previously? They were at Raconteur. I'll go fishing in the Raconteur pond. What Raconteur were excellent at is mopping up people who came from red brick universities like myself without a plan. They were the people who had a high level of ability, but weren't doctors, lawyers, or bankers. They were really good at it. And then, again, another apology to Will. I spoke to some of their competitors over the years, mainly when we were arguing over negotiation at the end of the year. Unimpressive, completely different talent pool, completely different set of processes, and an inferior product. And this happened 2 or 3 times. And it goes back to my earlier point, actually, like around patience. I think a better way to frame it is the grass is always greener.
That's a point. We weren't going to cover that point, but I think that point on patience is absolutely critical. And I've spoken to, I think in the last 18 months, 2 years, people have, in lots of different scenarios, been bitten on the bum when it comes to maybe joining the wrong business at the right time, redundancies. Things have happened that people didn't anticipate happening. Certainly 2 years ago, that people weren't thinking about these as being problems, and now they are. And I think that people's view on their career and where they are and what they're doing has definitely changed a lot. And I see that the really switched on people now, I think, are really focused more on finding the right products and the right people rather than being too fixated on what the role is or what the opening base salary package is. Of course, there are, you have to value yourself and understand what value you bring to a business, but I don't think it's the market is different now, right?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I know we're probably going to come on to this later, but if I just edge on it a little bit, transitioning industry is when it's super difficult because every person you speak to that is hiring or has founded a business will have either they will have a false sense of belief or they will project a false sense of belief, because ultimately the best thing they can do to move the needle on the business is hire the best people. So it's pretty hard to get an understanding when you're not familiar with a certain world of, well, what does good actually look like? And if someone says something's good, what are the steps that I can take to qualify it? And I've personally, there's one mistake that I made personally, which was joining Stack Overflow at a time when it was not in a good place. And it's actually one of the reasons you mentioned, it was Ashley Ekus was the guy that hired me. And I really liked him as a manager and a coach. I still really like him. But ultimately, the market and the product weren't there.
Yeah.
And it depends on your prior track record, right? But you can't make too many big mistakes, I think. No. It's just going to set you back.
I agree. The longer I've done this, the more I've been able to reflect on some people that I look at their career journey. And what I've identified is that there's a mix of, there's performance, of course there is, but there's also choosing, making the right choice at the right time, choosing the right project at the right time. And actually, again, coming back to my point earlier, sometimes transitioning the role slightly, sometimes not coming in at the same level of seniority, but being part of the right business at the right time is absolutely critical. And I've realized that more and more. And when you dive into people's reasoning for moves and why they made those moves, the people who just don't make mistakes are really hyper-focused on that point.
Yeah, I think that's bang on.
I've experienced. We've gone forward. I'm just going to take it back slightly. You're looking to leave Raconteur. You decided that you want to make this move into selling software. How? Like, how do you go about it? What's the approach? What works? What didn't work?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the most valuable thing you can do is lean on your network and find people who will give you advice. But in my experience in general, if you're going to come to someone asking for help, don't make them do a load of the heavy lifting. So I speak to yourself, I speak to Misha Jessel Kenyon, for example, who made a move from Raconteur, and I think he's now at Mistral, leader in large language models. Come to them with, this is why I want to leave. More importantly, this is what I'm looking for, and this is why I'm looking for it. So I'd say that's the absolute basics. And that was the initial blueprint I had. What became clear quite quickly was that the best place for me to go and learn and develop at speed, which is what I wanted, would be a sales company with an aggressive MEDDIC playbook. Because the training is normally excellent, the expectations are normally very high, and it's a sink or swim environment. So I actually set myself a task of finding a baptism of fire, because I didn't want to go from being here in one industry to going here in another, and then that ramp up period taking years. I wanted it to take months.
And did you find it easy to be accepted at the same level that you were leaving Raconteur to come in? And not the same level, because I think you have more responsibility to Raconteur, so that's probably not the right question, but to make that kind of like sideways transition rather than what people often are told they have to do, is to make a backward step.
So that's a really good question. I think there's a few ways to look at the question, right? So I went to Multiverse and they hire on ICE, so intelligence, character, coachability, experience being the least important. So their whole kind of recruitment model is actually geared in a way whereby you shouldn't need to have an uphill battle to demonstrate the value of your experience. It should be your intelligence, your character, your coachability that wins. So in that, it was the perfect move for me for that reason. But funnily enough, when I left Multiverse, there was an uphill battle around joining Stack Overflow, specifically, I hadn't sold software before.
Mm-hmm.
It's a battle I ultimately won. And the irony is I'm now in one of the most technically demanding software roles that I think you can have. MLOps as a kind of school of thought is something that even people who work in it don't completely understand yet. But yeah, a battle, but if you find the right company that will give you a chance and the right sales leader in particular, then it's a battle you can win.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. And what I hear a lot and what people say to me a lot is that there is a huge difference in selling software in comparison to selling anything else.
Yeah. I'm thinking about this because to be fair, there is, but I think the nuances, in my opinion, is it enterprise selling? Is it not enterprise selling?
Yep.
And they are very different things, but that's not necessarily software specific. Mm-hmm. In my mind, the questions that sales leaders should be asking if they want to hire someone is not, have they sold tech before? It is, are they intelligent enough to get their head around our tech? And you have sales engineers, you have support people. Sometimes I feel like people position that transition in a way whereby you have to be an engineer to get the job. Yeah. And I think it's arrogant at times, and I don't think it's accurate. So have they got the intelligence? Have they got the drive? But then I actually think the main things that I would look for if I'm hiring, the markers of success would be, are they diligent? Can they run a good process? Can they hustle? And the reason those things are important in software, the hustle, I'll start with that. It's not 2021, right? This is a tough job. You can't sit there and expect to collect checks. And I think some people think that SaaS sales is like some golden ticket. It maybe was for a little bit. It's not anymore. Yeah. Then can they run a process? Will it feed into what SaaS companies want, which is that repeatable and predictable revenue model? And then the diligence side of things, I think, is particularly important when it comes to enterprise selling. To give you an example, I'm working on a couple of RFPs at the moment. Let's be optimistic for a second. If they both close, we're talking $1 million plus in ARR. You have in certain weeks 20 plus stakeholders. Yeah. And what I find is the most effective thing to do is ask yourself every day, is there anything that I need to do? And is there anything I should be doing? And analyze a deal and make sure you do the actions quickly, but you don't cut any corners. And I think that element, that is something that can be quite software specific because of the size and the complexity of the deals. But I definitely don't buy into the ethos that someone needs a proven track record in SaaS. I don't, and I didn't. And a lot of my good friends don't and didn't.
No, I agree. That's a great answer, by the way. And a lot of detail there. I'm going to make sure that section is definitely clipped, because I think for anyone listening who's on that journey, there's a lot to unpick there, which is relevant.
As long as you're not clipping it out because you think it was boring.
I'll let you know. I'll let you know. You referenced MEDDIC. So you said that was one of the key things that you identified. And the prevalence of MEDDIC and MEDDIC training even in the last 2 years, I think has gone absolutely through the roof. There are businesses. There was a time when I would only see MEDDIC used in it as a methodology for enterprise selling. And now I have founders or companies who are not selling an enterprise solution saying MEDDIC is important. I need to find people who've got MEDDIC. How important has that methodology and that framework been to you in making that transition? And how much do you find that you lean on it?
Yeah, great question. I would say my brain went through a change when I was at Multiverse. They are incredibly MEDDIC driven as an organization. Yep. What I've left with is, instead of it being a framework that I'm constantly measuring deals against, it's more a way of thinking, particularly when it comes to decision criteria, champions and pain. If I drill down deeper, if you don't have a champion, you don't have pain, you don't have a deal. And it sounds obvious, but actually sometimes people won't stop and ask themselves the question about the individuals that they're speaking with in a target account. So I would say very important from a mindset and cultural perspective. I
Yeah.
don't necessarily use it as a framework for my deals, but I think that's partially because it's ingrained in the way I now think about selling and sales cycles.
That makes sense. That makes sense. What's the, in your experience, what has been actually, maybe we've already covered it slightly, but what's been the biggest surprise for you moving into software sales environments when you compare it to the environment that you left at Raconteur? What are the things that have actually, I don't know, maybe shocked you, if anything?
Good question. It's hard. And I would say anyone who's making the transition, expect it to be harder than you expect. And if you expect it to be harder than you expect, then you'll probably be okay if you have the other fundamentals down. And what I mean by that is the ramp up is a challenge. I would say there is a much deeper focus on discovery, and you have to be good at it, and you can get better at it. And I think for me, that's something I really enjoy, and I'm still working on myself. Point three, things don't move that quickly. I came from quite a transactional industry, but by the time I left, I was doing 6 to 12 month deal cycles, and deal cycles that sometimes would last an hour to a few hours. So I had experience there. And then finally, fighting over territories. That is something I had not experienced before. That is a problem. It's a massive friction point in certain teams. It's not a problem that the company I'm at that we currently experience. But that was a surprise for me. And I think it can lead to tribalism in a company.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I guess that probably happens at that sticking point of growth where you go from just a handful of AEs to trying to expand and build out that team, right?
Yeah, exactly right. And it also, I think one thing companies don't necessarily do quickly enough, maybe because they can't, is readjust to market conditions. Everyone is buying tech in 2021. There aren't many questions asked. All of a sudden, if the appetite is at 30% what it was, are you adjusting the size of territories? Are you tripling the size of territories to make up for that? Probably not. You've already allocated them. You've got too many people. What do you do then? Then ultimately people might be laid off, or there'll be that infighting that I'm referring to.
Makes sense. I spoke to a candidate yesterday who positioned this in a way I've never really thought about before, and this is a question that we've not prepped for, but I hope you'll understand the reason for answering it. They were referencing a book called, I think it was called Crossing the Chasm, and the book is about I've not looked at it yet, but basically it's about product development, and it's about the life cycle of the product and how you go from early adoption to maturity and then through the other end. And this person was that very senior revenue leader who was saying you need different skills in your AEs depending on at what stage of the product's life cycle you're at. And he said that's what he was saying that he's built a matrix around, if I'm hiring for a really early stage business and where there's a brand new market and there's you're taking something completely new to an audience, what I'm prioritizing is people who are fantastic storytellers, because they need to be incredible at that narrative and driving that narrative. Whereas if I'm going to hire within an existing team where the product's really well known, I need to find people who are incredibly robust in their process and they have got their process absolutely locked down, because I need people who are just going to come in and rinse and repeat. Have you experienced that? Because you've worked in smaller businesses and in bigger businesses over the last couple of years. What's your view?
I certainly like the concept. Have I experienced different types of salespeople doing better in different stages of organizations? Yes. And
it's a better way to ask the question, Reuben. Yeah.
No, all good. And I would also say applies to different size companies that you're selling to as well. But in Multiverse, process was like drilled into people. It's quite uncomfortable as well when you're learning it if you're not used to it, but it was drilled into people and it's very effective and it's scalable and repeatable. And I think they were in this, I'm cheating, by the way, I've Googled the graph. I would say they were in the early majority stage.
Okay.
When I joined, they moved from early adopters. In my current company, absolutely in the early adopter stage, and absolutely inspiring and telling a story is definitely important. And then if I think about Stack Overflow, laggard stage. I don't know what the solution is in that
Yeah,
particular
yeah.
phase of growth. But yeah,
Excellent. Thank you.
definitely experienced it, and I love the theory. I would just say in a startup, it can be a mixture of everything, because if I think about my current market, MLOps, it's super early, but the field has been around for 11 years is when I think the term was first coined. So you will speak to some people who are super mature, they get it. They don't necessarily want you to spin them a narrative. They do want you to run a good process. Then you'll get people who are lost and confused, and you're approaching them with something that almost sounds too good for what they need. And then you have to give them the story, make them feel comfortable and nice, so they understand that they'll be looked after, and that the mountain that they're climbing as they go from visionary to early adopter, for example, doesn't have to be that steep, because you're gonna carry them up it.
Yep. I'm gonna go and do the research that you've just done to check it out in the graph in more detail. My last question, because we're coming up to that half an hour, and we've covered a lot, which has been great. We've talked a little bit about this before, and actually you've provided me a couple of examples in previous businesses where you've worked with really good BDR talent. And I think that it's a really hard transition, because you successfully made the move from being in a closing role raconteur to in a closing role a multiverse. I see a lot of people who really struggle to make that transition, and they get driven back into an SDR or BDR role. It does depend on how much experience you have, and there are ways you can get around it. We've already covered that. I don't believe that you necessarily need to have closed before to be able to go for a closing role. I've not done that personally within the SaaS business I've recruited, but I have been in closing roles earlier on in my career. And I think there's incredible BDRs who look to leave great businesses, and that company is losing that talent because they won't just move them into being an AE.
Yes. So firstly, love the question and the hypothesis. It's something that's quite close to my heart personally. I think first and foremost, the manager and the culture of the business, whether they're a BDR, whether they're going to leave your company or stay, that is critical. And the AE's behavior is critical. I have worked in companies where AEs take credit for SDR's work, and it's completely unnecessary. The AE will still get a big old pat on the back if they do something well, but the confidence of the BDR is important, right? And they should be praised for their work. It is such a difficult job. So I think if I think about how I would advise a BDR with that context, it would be when you're in a BDR work role, ask for the exposure you deserve, ask for the shout outs. And then, and this is important, if a company and a culture genuinely cares about developing people, and specifically BDRs, if they're doing a good job, give them exposure and let them do bits of the AE job. If that is introducing a call, if it's closing a call, if it's sitting on a new business meeting, or if it's some of the discovery work. And what that puts the BDR in a position to do is make a really strong case for a business that perhaps needs a closer at the SMB level, but they want that drive of someone who's going to hunt themselves, and they can go, I've been an amazing hunter of new business, setting up meetings. Oh, by the way, I might not have closing experience, but I delivered this on this project, this on this project, this on this project. And then they can show that transferable experience. So I think it comes down to the culture of the businesses where they're at, as you've rightly identified. But it also, my advice to BDRs would be go and ask for that exposure, demand that exposure, and lay out your reasons why. And then have salespeople love a story, right? In fact, sales leaders love a story. Have a really good story as to why you can bring something different with that combined experience and drive when you're banging on the door of an AE role. That's my thinking on the problem, the cause of the problem, but then ultimately what BDRs should do, which is not sit there complaining, come up with a plan. Complain a bit. Everyone loves complaining about work, right? If you rang my CEO or my boss Rasmus and asked them how much has Reuben complained this week, it's a lot. Everyone likes complaining, but come up with a plan. And it's hard. You can't change someone's character, but I've worked with AEs that are just selfish. Is maybe one of the reasons that make them good at their job. I personally don't think it scales well. Don't work with a selfish AE, and don't work for a sales leader that doesn't care.
I love that. I love that. We'll finish there. That's a great way to wrap it up. Look, so I really appreciate you jumping on, Reuben. I think there's a lot we've covered there. You might not realize how impactful that could be to somebody else listening, but or maybe you do. I don't know. Some people I speak to don't realize the impact that these kind of things can have. But yeah, I think I'm really happy. I'm really happy for you as well that you found an environment and a business and a product that is just meeting all of your expectations. So thank you.
No worries, man. This has been a pleasure. I'm a self-confessed attention seeker, and I've never done anything like this. I've enjoyed it.
You should do more of it. You're good at it.
Thanks, mate. I appreciate it. I should be more responsive and easier to work.
Yeah.
So there you go.
You've got to be persistent in these things.
True, mate.
I'm going to wrap it up, but thank you very much. Thank you, everyone who's listened and those who are listening in the future, and hopefully you enjoy the content.
Thanks, Lloyd. Take it easy, man.
Cheers, mate.
Bye.